Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Danny Dhaiphong here. Going to let YouTube kind of catch up. How are you all doing today? I believe I am live, although I don't see the numbers. Okay, there we go. There we go. Please do like the stream. Please do like the stream. Welcome on this Saturday early evening. Hi, everyone. This is Danny Dhaiphong here. Hope you are all doing well. Make sure that you're liking the stream. Make sure that you're subscribing to this channel if you're new here. Make sure that you are hitting that notifications bell. And please, 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 if you are able, make sure to support this work at patreon.com/DannyHighFog. Now I'm about $41 shy of my annual goal. So thanks to all those who have been helping out. Nonetheless, though, I saw a very special person in the chat. I think that was JB. Great to see you. I'll say hello to all of you before I get started. Hi, JB. I owe you an interview. I have a list of people I owe. It's really, whew, it is bad. So apologies for that, but no doubt we will come together. We will come together. I promise you that. Nonetheless, though, I want to just say hello to everyone before I get started. Hello, Red. Hello, Red. Hi, NSPK, who says Tucker must be a really deep thinker. Sure. Hello, XY. Hello to you. Hello, peace to AG. Hi, the Wilk Report. Technical difficulties do suck. You know, I think I'm basically putting my laptop through what I think is too much with the work that I'm doing because I'm doing more and more of this streaming. So I may need an upgrade, which makes, of course, subscribing on Patreon that much more important because I'm going to need a better one. I have a gaming laptop that's okay, but I did buy it on a budget. So please, 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 just keep that in mind that this work does have its costs. There is constant capital involved here. So please do support the work. Patreon.com/DannyHighFong. Thank you so much, Wilk, for coming. The Wilk Report. Hi, Ventos. Hi, Knight Gaunce. Hello, Pawn Takes Bishop. So I already said hello. Anthony, hello, hello, hello again. NSPK77. Hello, Strong Veek. Hey, dude, to you too. Anthony's hot and bothered. Strong Vink is I am live. Okay. So, hey, Where? Hey, James. Hi, Nadia. Can you upgrade the memory? That may help a lot, says Where. I may do that. I have to call where I got it from. Hi, Eric. Hi, how are you doing? Hello, Tony. Hello, Chaz. Hello, Antonio. And hello, Christian. But I'm going to end there with all the hellos. Good evening, everyone. Danny Dhaiphong here again. For those who are new to the channel, this is The Left Lens. Please do subscribe. Please do hit the notifications bell. The most important thing you can do while watching is to like the stream, okay? Because that helps boost the algorithm, helps more people see it. So right now, I see that we have 64 likes and about 99 viewers. So let's boost that up a bit, okay? Let's boost those likes up, and we will get more viewers here. Hit that like button. Hit that like button. Hit that like button. Okay, how do I sound, everyone? Please, a quick sound check. I was only able to do it really fast because I didn't want to keep you all waiting. So please do give me a sound check whenever you're able. But I'm going to just introduce what we're going to talk about today, okay? Let's introduce. So Tucker Carlson, right? We've talked about Tucker Carlson a couple of times here. Alan McLeod's article, I believe we reviewed. We talked about his shady connections. We've talked about what he's done. We've talked about who he is. So we're not going to focus so much on that today, okay? You can catch my older streams, my other streams that I've done on Tucker Carlson to get a sense of who he is. But you know that he's Fox News. He is the most popular talk show host, news anchor, whatever he is. He is the most popular in terms of views and who watches him, ratings. So I wanted to talk about what he said recently about China because it was in a segment he did on Joe Biden, of course, and how bad Joe Biden is handling the inflation crisis, that gas prices are still up. And he really does take some digs at China. This is something he does a lot, connecting the Democratic Party to China. He's someone who really pushes this narrative. And I think it's important, though, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how Tucker Carlson, what he's saying, actually has a lot of irony to it, because we can actually compare and contrast China and the United States in very concrete ways in terms of their role in the world, and demonstrate what I think would be the exact opposite of what Tucker Carlson was saying about China. So I wanted to focus on that because someone actually messaged me recently. I think it was over Instagram, and said, "Hey, how come you haven't covered China announcing that it's going to build 1,000 schools in Iraq?" And I said, "Oh, I should cover that." So so that's going to be in this stream today. And there's also going to be other examples of China's role in the world versus the US role in the world, and how each conducts themselves, to kind of give a picture of exactly how ridiculous Tucker Carlson sounds and looks when he talks about China like this. And these are just the facts. This is cold hard facts, and I hope that it's informative. But let's actually look at a clip that Sky News. We're going to begin with a clip that Sky News produced. And I'm going to use my trusty headphones so you don't hear any echo. But we're going to look at a clip that Sky News produced of this segment that kind of summarizes what he was talking about, right? What he was talking about, the broader context, because there's been a lot said and not a lot challenged. And so one of the challenges about Tucker Carlson, I'll just preface it here, is that Tucker Carlson has given his platforms to anti-war leftists, to people who are on the left who lean anti-war. Now, he doesn't give platforms to everybody, right? But there is a subsection of people who I've respected over the years, and that's not to take away from that. However, I think that while that is, I guess, important, we should not undermine or say, "Oh, well, that's just, that's worthless." I do think that there are, I guess, if we were to look at how communists think, or how someone like myself thinks who studies dialectical materialism, there are secondary contradictions and then there are principal contradictions. So I would say that Tucker Carlson's willingness to have leftists on is actually secondary to what he does overall in terms of his broader role in the media, and how damaging Tucker Carlson's rhetoric is about China, is about many things, but China is one of the biggest targets of his. Sometimes he says contradictory things about China, but in the main, his whole line and how he makes a living and how he gains popularity is by writing this and being one of the principal facilitators of this wave of anti-China, yellow peril, new Cold War sentiment. So I would say that's the principal contradiction, the principal problem, the principal thing we should be looking at when talking about Tucker Carlson, while the secondarily, but not unimportant, it's just secondary. It's secondary in the sense that it's good. I'm not going to criticize having certain anti-war leftists and journalists on, but I think it's interesting that he can do that while at the same time promoting some of the most reactionary imperialist rhetoric that we see on mainstream media, on Western mainstream media, because that's just the facts. You can't talk about China like the way he does and not characterize it as such. Doesn't mean that what the Democrats and what the mainstream media on the so-called quote-unquote liberal end and how they demonize Russia and fearmonger over Russia is any better. It just means that the rhetoric that Tucker Carlson uses in relation to China does punch harder and targets the very base of people that a lot of anti-war leftists and journalists who go on his platform are trying to shape people toward the side of peace. Well, Tucker Carlson, when he talks about China like this, and I'm going to show you how he talked about China in this scenario, when he talks about China, he's actually pushing that audience toward a warmongering position about China. So that's a problem. And that's what I'm identifying here. So let's look at this video, okay? So I'm going to put on my headphones because I want to listen with you. Let's watch this segment, okay? And I'm going to pull it up here. Let me just share the screen. Please do like the video while you are waiting for this to be pulled up. Please do subscribe to the channel. Hit that notifications bell. All right, so here we go. So I'm just going to make it bigger for all of you. All right, here we go. So here you have Sky News Australia. Impeach him. Joe Biden savaged for sending U.S. oil reserves abroad. Here we go.
American citizens who are born here and vote and pay taxes cannot afford to fuel their own cars. The Biden administration is selling off our emergency oil reserves to China. That's not an indictable offense. It's certainly an impeachable one. And they should impeach him for that.
There's a Reuters report out this morning that says that more than 5 million barrels of oil that were released from the emergency oil reserves were exported to Europe and Asia last month, and some of it reportedly was actually heading to China. Is the administration aware of those reports? And does the president mind that some of this oil that was meant to ease pain for consumers is headed overseas?
I have not seen that report, so I would honestly have to go look into it and see what the truth is in that statement that you just laid out, and see exactly what's happening. I just have not seen that report.
Today, I'm authorizing the release of 1 million barrels per day for the next 6 months, over 180 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This is a wartime bridge to increase oil supply until production ramps up later this year. And it is by far the largest release of our national reserve in our history.
Since Joe Biden started releasing all this oil from our reserves, which he does not own, you do, we do, what has happened to gas prices? They haven't dropped. They've kept going up. Huh? In mid-June, the price of both regular unleaded and diesel, critically, hit all-time highs, well over $5 a gallon nationally. How could this be? It really was a mystery. It violated the most basic rules of economics. But now, thanks to a new report in Reuters, we know why. It turns out the oil being released isn't for us. It's going to India and China. No president in American history has ordered a drawdown this large. In 1991, at the beginning of Operation Desert Storm, which was an actual war with real American soldiers involved, the U.S. government released 17 million barrels of oil as a way of assuring a stable supply of global crude. The U.S. released just 20 million barrels after Hurricane Katrina destroyed parts of the Gulf Coast where so many refineries are. But now we're releasing many times that figure from the reserve, all to protect the Democratic Party from getting what it deserves in the midterm elections in November. What Biden could have done is produce more oil domestically, but that would have been too easy and too good for the United States and its long-term interests. Instead, he decided to do something so crazy and so dangerous that only someone who was intentionally trying to harm the United States would even consider it. The crude, by the way, in the SPR is the best crude that we have. It's called medium sour crude. It's the easiest to process, and we're giving it away to a government whose whole goal is to displace us on the global stage and crush us.
So the whole goal of China is to displace the United States and crush the United States, according to Tucker Carlson. And I mean, that's just such that's a criminal thing to say. That is criminal propaganda to promote that as fact. That is a wild claim that has absolutely no basis in reality. But Tucker Carlson is quite seriously saying this and saying that Joe Biden's moves here, and this is what people like Tucker Carlson always do. They pick upon what, in retrospect, here is not the most, how should I say, crucial issue, right? The United States sending oil to other countries isn't really the principal issue when it comes to why prices are so high. We had Richard Wolff on here. We had Michael Hudson on here. They will tell you, they've said, none of their answers said, well, it's because the United States is sending oil elsewhere. No, or strategic oil reserves elsewhere. And also, the problem with his solution, which is pump more oil in the United States, is that it creates huge imbalances in the market and ultimately serves as it's an artificial way to lower prices, because that supply cannot be met with demand. Because what does the United States do when it pumps oil? It doesn't pump it at prices that are reasonable. It doesn't help underdeveloped and poor countries receive that oil. It pumps it on the market, produces way too much, and ultimately screws over countries like Venezuela, for example, which needs to also export oil in order to keep its economy going. So the United States here, Tucker Carlson is saying, has this easy answer for inflation, has this easy answer for price to pump more oil and to keep more oil for ourselves, right? It's this like totally simplistic, quote unquote, nationalistic way of looking at economics, without understanding that his very solution has been part of the problem with the world capitalist economy for quite some time. The United States has done this many times before. Pump more oil, get more oil out to the world market, and actually it does so to try to sabotage countries like Russia and like Venezuela. It's done that in the past. So not even what Tucker Carlson is saying is sensical, and yet he then pivots to say that China wants to displace us. China wants to displace us and crush us. To say such a thing, you need to say why, how is China trying to displace us, quote unquote, and crush us? I mean, it's simply put, pearl clutching in the corporate media. It's all about, this is what Tucker Carlson is saying to his viewers. You need to be scared of China because they are going to be the top economy, and you need to be scared of that. And it is criminal that Joe Biden's administration would send oil to China. And don't forget all these other countries, but China is trying to displace us and crush us, right? That's just such an oversimplification, but this is what people like him do. They oversimplify things. This is what all mainstream media does. They reduce issues to meaninglessness. They reduce them to meaninglessness so that they can promote the Red Scare talking point that gets people angry at the wrong thing. Here, not even his criticism of Joe Biden is very legitimate, because he's not even talking about what the root cause of the problem is. He's going after this very small thing that's happened and is trying to say that you could just resolve this crisis by hoarding strategic oil reserves, and then that would resolve it. That's not going to resolve a situation where these corporations are literally raising prices based upon their own desire to make mega profits. A lot of the gas and oil crisis, this like rising prices, is because of that. They are seeing what's happened with Russia, Ukraine, the sanctions, and they are now putting just immense pain on people to make up for what they perceive will be massive losses on the world market. He's not saying that though. Tucker Carlson is saying, no. If we just hoard our resources, we have all this. It's easy oil. If we just hoard it, then that's going to solve the problem. Not really. It's not really going to solve the problem. So let's continue.
The Chinese will be cruel masters when they run the world. They're not like us at all. By the way, that country, China, also happens to be a longtime business partner of the Biden family.
So, I mean, this has been one of these real spurious things, right? Biden family and China, doing business in China. How crazy, right? It's repeating this trope that the Democrats had, right? The Democrats were like, oh, the Trump family, Trump administration, the Trump hotel, they have all these investments in Russia. That's such a scandal. You're doing business in other countries. Not really a scandal. Now, let me tell you one thing. Hunter Biden, this dude, I mean, he's all messed up. And we know about him. We know about the kickbacks he's gotten. That's what all Western US business people, the corporate class, the ruling class, that's what they get. That's how they behave. But to say that, oh, doing business in China is the big problem, that's the dog whistle, right? This is all a dog whistle. And to think, did you hear what Tucker Carlson said? We have to go back and listen to this. Did you hear what he said? This guy is he's unhinged. He's unhinged here for saying this.
By the way, that country.
Sorry, that's not it. Gotta go back a little bit more.
Whose whole goal is to displace us on the global stage and crush us. The Chinese will be cruel masters when they run the world. They're not like us at all.
The Chinese will be cruel masters when they run the world. They're not like us at all. They will be cruel masters when they run the world. They're not like us at all. Hear that again. Can you believe, I mean, that this could come out? This is how unhinged, warmongering, this is how just deep, I mean, this is deeply racist too, to paint China as this completely inhumane entity that is contrasted with the US's so-called benevolence. This is American exceptionalism and racism on steroids. So listen to this again.
The Chinese will be cruel masters when they run the world. They're not like us at all.
The Chinese are cruel masters when they run the world. They are not like us at all. I mean, that is just such a scripted way to portray China as our enemy, to dehumanize China and the Chinese people, and to promote a modern day version of yellow peril, that we need to be scared of China, that China is coming for our lunch, that China is going to overtake the United States. It's going to dominate. It's going to be a cruel master when it runs the world. And I'm not going to show any more of this because ultimately we got the context. We know what Tucker Carlson was talking about. These are the remarks, though, that I want to go off of, right? That the China will be a cruel master. China is going to be the cruel master here, guys. And I think we have to first, I mean, when we respond to something like this, it's quite easy, right? This is as TNT just said, typical racist American commentary. We have to look at, well, what is this commentary? What is this racist commentary, this yellow peril commentary, this anti-China commentary? What is it concealing? Well, for one, what American exceptionalism and this hubris, this superiority complex always conceals is what the United States is actually all about. To say that China is not like us because they'll be cruel completely erases, whitewashes the whole entire history of the United States. We can go all the way back to chattel slavery, genocide and colonialism, indigenous people, anyone who wasn't a property owner, i.e. a capitalist or a petty capitalist. We're not even human beings. We're not even able to exercise any rights in the United States in the early years. And then we can move forward, of course, to the Monroe Doctrine, to expansionism, Mexico. We can go on and on and on. There's so many examples right? The Philippines, just building this empire, regime change, colonialism, imperialism, occupying Haiti. We can go on and on and on about what the United States has done, right? Overthrowing dozens of countries, trying to. I was in a stream before this, I was talking about how even the Washington Post admits that the United States tried 72 times between the years of 1945 and 1990, 72 times to overthrow governments around the world. Supposedly, it was only successful like 30% of the time, but 30% is still a high rate. And I think that's an undercount when we read people like William Blum, who have shown that the U.S. has had a covert role in more than 50 over that same period, just in those, 45 years? In those 45 years alone, the United States had a role in overthrowing 50 governments around the world, most of them attempting to exercise some form of sovereignty, some form of self-determination, some form of socialism in many cases, not all, but in many. Whether we're talking about Iran, the overthrow of Mossadegh, whether we're talking about the Contras, supporting the Contras in Nicaragua, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, right? Whether we're talking about the attempted overthrow of the Chinese Revolution right after the revolution, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs, right? Trying to overthrow Cuba's government, right? There's so many examples of the United States meddling in the affairs of other countries in a very cruel way. We're talking about tens of millions of people who have died over that period, just in that period. We're not even talking about the modern era, post-Soviet period, and we will. So I want to just show you a contrast, okay, between how actually China behaves in the world versus how the United States behaves in the world. This contrast, I think, is important. And we're going to start with the wars in the Middle East, with the United States, especially Afghanistan and Iraq. We're just going to focus on that. I'm going to show you what Brown University's Cost of War project has said about casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then I'm going to show you what China has decided to do in Iraq, for example, because it is quite different. And it really does contradict what Tucker Carlson says about China. And I think it's very important. And I want to thank Mr. O'Sullivan, or I don't know actually their pronouns, so I'm not going to be disrespectful. So there is a person who follows me on Instagram who did remind me about covering this topic. So I want to thank them. So I'm going to pull up the Cost of War project, okay? And what the United States did in Iraq and Afghanistan alone. And I believe that this may be an undercount from other figures I've seen, but nonetheless, I think it tells the story. So here it's Insider. Business Insider reports on the study that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have killed at least 500,000 people, according to a new report that breaks down the toll. Of the 76 countries in which the U.S. is currently fighting terrorism, at least 3 have been incredibly deadly: Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Brown University's Cost of Wars project recently released a report detailing just how deadly they've been. It counts how many people have been killed by the United States' post-war 9/11 wars in these 3 countries. The report accounts for deaths in Afghanistan and Pakistan between October 2001 and October 2018, and Iraq between March 2003 and October 2018. In October 2001, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. Of course, we know this is a bit old, but we know that the U.S. was ousted by the Taliban last year. So in March 2003, there was an invasion of Iraq, paved the way for ISIS, and Pakistan, they say, is a little murkier. But let's look at what the cost of war found, okay? 6,000 plus military deaths. Here you have the deaths of Afghanistan and Iraq, 2,000 plus, 4,500 plus. Then you have these U.S. contractor deaths. So as you may know, the United States really did privatize a lot of its war making during this period and gave all sorts of contracts to huge corporations that just absolutely, I think academia, which was formerly known. I forget its name, but here you go. Here's the contractor deaths for those who are participating in them. 3,793 deaths, 3,937. And then you have national military and police deaths. Here you have in Iraq and Afghanistan these huge numbers of more than 40,000 and almost 60,000. Then you have allied troop deaths, very small. This is the US NATO troops. These are the US allied troops. And then the civilians, more than 200,000, nearly 270,000 estimated. Okay, in Iraq, here you have the huge number, nearly 200,000. And then you have in Afghanistan, almost 40,000, Pakistan, 23 plus thousand. So, and then there's more opposition fighters, right? So those armed groups, they've lost many people, but you really don't know the exact character of this. So it's very dicey. And this is the hard thing about measuring war, right? Measuring the casualties of war is that it gets very dicey, especially in these wars where there were non-conventional forces and conventional forces, to be able to separate between civilian, non-civilian. So I would guess that there are many civilian deaths in this as well. Can we say that people who take up arms against an imperialist country to not be a civilian? While at the same time, in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were many foreign fighters, many jihadist elements. This goes back all the way to the Mujahideen and the U.S. role in backing and creating them back in 1979. So against the Soviet Union. So that there is a lot of complexity here. But I think and here you go, more than 362 journalists and media workers were killed in this. 566 humanitarian workers. So the death toll is vast. And so I think that you get the picture that the United States created a catastrophe in Iraq and Afghanistan, that the war on terror was a war of terror. And it's quite hard to believe, even if we didn't know anything about China, even if we didn't know anything about the situation, that it would be hard to believe that China is going to be more cruel than the United States if it were to take over the world, as Tucker Carlson said. So that's just a basic point. But now we can get into, well, what is China doing? Is China dropping bombs? Is China occupying Iraq? Is China trying to destabilize Afghanistan, right? Did it just replace the United States? Is it the new colonial power? Is it the next big power, big imperialist power that we need to worry about in this region? Is it going to cause devastation equivalent to, or maybe even in excess of, the United States and its allies? Not exactly. So let's look at what China recently announced just in Iraq alone, okay? Because I think this just tells the story, right? Because it would be quite ridiculous to think that China is going to bomb Iraq when actually it's about to build 1,000 schools in Iraq. So here is the South China Morning Post announced this all the way back. Oh, look at that advertisement. Okay. Announced this all the way back in December of 2021. It announced that it signs a deal to build 1,000 schools in Iraq as Beijing pushes for greater role in the Middle East after U.S. withdrawals. So China is going to build schools, and there were more recent reports about how they're starting to do that now, because that deal was signed more than nearly 8 months ago. Now the building is starting to happen. And so, it looks like there's a paywall here, and I'm not going to read the article, but there you have it. China has, I could get through the paywall, but we don't have time to read all of the articles that I have up. I just want to show you that there's 15 contracts on Thursday with the Power Construction Corporation of China and Sinotech. By the way, those companies are state-owned companies, so that's who's going to be operating and building these schools. So it's a major destination, right? And it makes sense for China because Iraq has all of these resources, and China can provide infrastructure development to help out Iraq, which has been devastated by the U.S. war there. I mean, do you remember Fallujah? What happened in 2004 in Fallujah? The United States leveled nearly all of the bombs and did so with depleted uranium. Used depleted uranium, and now people have cancer rates that are well in excess to the rest of the world. and did not do anything to help rebuild the infrastructure there. Left Iraq, left Fallujah to die. And now China is stepping in and saying, we'll build schools for you. More than 1,000. And so Tucker Carlson doesn't mention that. And I think that that's pretty disingenuous. That's pretty suspicious. And I would say that's downright hypocritical. But we shouldn't, I mean, I would never expect Tucker Carlson to even do basic research into something that's so simple, because there's a political agenda afoot with his coverage about China. But even just that basic premise that China is now now participating in the development of 1,000 schools in Iraq shows the hypocrisy of anyone who says that China will be more cruel than the United States, when the United States hasn't stepped in anywhere and said, we're going to build schools instead of bombs. You've seen the USAID, you've seen US financial dominated international financial institutions, so-called aid programs and all of that say, yeah, we'll build schools and we'll give you vaccines. But they only do it under the auspices of an intense debt regime, an IMF-led, World Bank-led debt regime, which actually plunders public wealth, destroys and privatizes public wealth. And then what you get are these minuscule, menial infrastructure projects, which ultimately don't help these countries develop, ultimately don't raise the standard of living, doesn't help with the public health situation and the education situation in countries like Iraq, in countries all over the African continent and Asia, etc. Actually, what it does is just more firmly implants US and Western finance capitalism and imperialism into those countries. So, sure, while you may have philanthropists, all privately backed for the most part, go into other countries and say, yeah, we're going to build XYZ. They never do. You saw what happened with Haiti's earthquake. You even saw what in Hurricane Katrina. The United States didn't even rebuild the Lower Ninth Ward, because guess what? The Lower Ninth Ward is a black neighborhood. They didn't even rebuild that. So they don't even rebuild in the United States, in their own so-called colonies, in oppressed communities. They don't do that. That's what we have here, this intense hypocrisy. This is what the American exceptionalism conceals, this actually abhorrent record. So while the United States is killing 500,000 plus people in Iraq and Afghanistan, has that record alone since 2001, China's building schools. China's building infrastructure. And that's a theme that we are going to highlight a lot in this stream. So another thing I want to just highlight is that China also I always love this about pundits like Tucker Carlson or anyone. The Financial Times does this a lot. There's a lot of outlets that kind of have this panic about China's ascendancy. They say, oh my gosh, China's going to, you even saw with the FBI and the MI5, which I covered in a stream, I covered in a stream before the last one, where I talked about how now the MI5 and the FBI have teamed up and said that China is now the biggest threat to their economies, right? That they're stealing all of this intellectual property, that they're hacking and cyber hacking and blah, blah, all this stuff, all these claims that they're stealing everything, they're competing unfairly, they're going to put your business out. And I said, well, US businesses, and more specifically, US monopolies and corporations, are responsible for all of this poverty. I mean, you know the situation right now. Look at what's happening. We have a minimum wage that's still $7.25 in most places federally, and then I mean, we know that some places pay less than that. We don't have a quote unquote $15 hour minimum wage anywhere except for a few places locally. And you've had wage stagnation, you've had wealth just dry up for the vast majority of people, and you have one of two people in or near poverty, and 80% of people living paycheck to paycheck in the United States. So you have a lot of poverty. You see it. If you live anywhere in the United States, you see the homelessness, you see the absolute depravity, the super exploitation. You see people sleeping on the streets. You see people in the shelters. You see the immense suffering that people are going through, the extreme stress. You may be watching this and be one of these people who have to work multiple jobs just to live and make basic needs, right? You may have medical debt, you may have student debt, right? And I don't want to go on some Bernie Sanders style rant, but the point here is that there's millions of people in the United States living in extreme poverty. I've worked with people who don't make more than $600 per month. I've worked with people like that who are in that economic situation, and then we tell them to go get housing, and then we tell them to go meet their food needs. Then we tell them to meet their transportation needs. Then we tell them to meet all sorts of other needs, right? To pay certain bills, utility bills, and all this. It's impossible at most places. Actually, in all places, it's impossible because we know how much it costs just to rent anywhere in the United States. No one who's making $600 a month is able to meet their basic needs. 1 in 2 people make less than $30,000 per year. I mean, that is absolutely just criminal. But yet China is the country that we should be worried about. And I always say this, I always find it hilarious when they're talking about China is going to undermine US corporations, US businesses. China is going to be is not like us. They're cruel. And I say, well, maybe I want that cruelty. Maybe I want US corporations to be undermined because perhaps we can address something like this. Perhaps we can also have a zero poverty marker. Maybe we can also meet a zero poverty marker of our own volition and meet it 1 month before deadline, like China did in November of 2020. I wonder what was happening in November of 2020. Oh, right. A pandemic was happening. It was just starting. We were 8 months or so for China. They were more so 11 months into what has been a deadly pandemic that has been absolutely catastrophic to social and economic life, but China still eliminated extreme poverty. China was once the most extreme, the most one of the most poorest countries with the highest rates of extreme poverty in the world, and then each year since 2012 had 98 million or so people in extreme poverty. Each year reduced it with a targeted poverty alleviation program. Doesn't mean that people in China are rich, especially even those who got out of extreme poverty, because we're talking about something like in China, I think the number is a couple bucks an hour higher than the World Bank standard. But also, China adds in the important things, the 2 assurances and the 3 guarantees, which are food, clothing, healthcare, housing, and education, into what it means to experience extreme poverty and get out of it. So I don't want to hear all the, oh, extreme poverty, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal to meet those 2 assurances and 3 guarantees and increase people's income. That's a big deal to me. That's a huge deal, especially when I think about, and I've met people, I went to China, I met people who are rural workers who still work on collective farms or their own private farms. It's a big deal to be able to meet that marker. And that's what China has done. The United States has not done that. The United States has an economy that's still roughly 5 to 6 times in per capita income. I mean, per capita GDP. Sorry. And per capita GDP larger than China, yet still has millions of people living in extreme poverty, catching hookworm and all these diseases, not able to meet basic needs, sleeping on the streets. I mean, China doesn't have that. China met that mark. China met that challenge within its own context. So maybe I want it. Call me crazy. But if I see a country that has that goal and then meets it ahead of time and also does it during a pandemic, I want to sip what they're sipping. I want to understand what they're doing. I don't see that as cruel at all. So you see the dynamic here. Tucker Carlson is trying to inculcate and ingratiate into the minds of Americans. He's trying to tell them that you should be scared while not saying what exactly you should be scared of. And I'm saying, well, if we're scared of poverty alleviation, then we're in big trouble because we're not going to have any kind of class struggle in the United States if we're scared of that. So those are just 2 points: the infrastructure instead of bombs, and then the poverty alleviation instead of, well, all of the poverty that we have in the United States with no poverty alleviation program. Haven't heard it. You barely hear it out of the mouths of US politicians. sorry, you saw it. They were saying poverty sort of during the election, and then the Build Back Better plan, and then that was shelved, right, by Democratic Party intransigence, so-called divisions, really political games. So that was shelved. And then what happened? Well, the American Rescue Plan or whatever that was, it expired. And then so the child poverty that was reduced, right? You had this 8 million, I think, right? I think it was around roughly 8 million children lifted out. Well, they're right back in. And now there's inflation. So they're right back in, and their families, these children and their families, are suffering more now. So there's no poverty alleviation program in the United States. I've worked for anti-poverty agencies. I know. I know what it's like not to have any poverty alleviation plan. I worked for agencies that were outgrowths of the war on poverty, the so-called Great Society, war on poverty, during the Johnson administration. And then, there was funding that was doled out after that as well. So I've worked in organizations like that. And I can say quite clearly that there is no poverty alleviation program in the United States. There's a poverty maintenance program. So if you're poor and you need to not die, you might get a little bit of utility assistance. You may or may not get some SNAP, right? So you don't die. You get a couple bucks a day on SNAP, so you don't die. Maybe, but you might die anyway. The cops might kill you like they did Jalen Walker. You might just get sick and not be able to afford it without insurance. You may just be a black woman in the United States, right? My wife just dealt with this. She works as a nurse in a postpartum. You may be a black woman who's homeless, who's pregnant. And the doctors may just say, yeah, let's give you a C-section and kill you, because they don't care about your pain. They don't care about your pain at all. They don't care about your situation. They're just like slice and dice and get them out because they are eating money. They aren't paying, right? People who are homeless and poor, they don't really pay for those beds. So they get them out as soon as possible. And people die because of it, especially black people. A lot of black people die because of the racism and the economic exploitation that goes on in the hospital system, in the medical healthcare, so-called healthcare system. So what's cruel exactly? China? Or is it really the United States that's cruel? I don't know. You can be the judge of that. I think you get where I'm going. So I want to talk about now Africa and Latin America. All right. So I'm going to show you, okay, what the United States does in Latin America. And I don't have to go very far. I'm just going to show you one example. All right. Just one example. You all might remember this. It's still relevant today. Those sanctions haven't ended. These sanctions haven't ended. So in 2019, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, they published a study. This is from Sanctions Kill, a campaign you should all support. They published a study that tens of thousands of deaths occurred in Venezuela because of U.S. sanctions. So a new paper from the Center for Economic and Policy Research by economists Mark Weisbrot and Jeffrey Sachs find that economic sanctions implemented by the Trump administration since August 2017 have caused tens of thousands of deaths and are rapidly worsening the humanitarian crisis. The sanctions are depriving Venezuelans of life-saving medications, medicines, medical equipment, food, and other essential imports, said Mark Weisbrot, the co-director of the CEPR and co-author of the report. This is illegal and under U.S. and international law and treaties that the U.S. has signed. Congress should move to stop it. The paper notes that the recognition by the Trump administration of a parallel government in January created a whole new set of financial and trade sanctions that are devastating to the economy and population. These new restrictions make it more difficult to even pay for medicines and other essential imports with the limited foreign exchange that is available. The authors also explain how the sanctions prevent an economic recovery from the country's severe economic depression and hyperinflation. Venezuela's economic crisis is routinely blamed all on Venezuela, said Jeffrey Sachs, co-author of the paper, but it is much more than that. American sanctions are deliberately aiming to wreck Venezuela's economy, and thereby lead to regime change. It's a fruitless, heartless, illegal, and failed policy causing grave harm to the Venezuelan people. Here are the results of the broad economic sanctions by the Trump administration since 2017 of August. An estimated more than 40,000 deaths just from a 2-year period, 2017 and 2018. The sanctions have reduced the availability of food and medicine and increased disease and mortality. The August 2017 sanctions contributed to a sharp decline in oil production that caused great harm to the civilian population. So I'm sure there were blackouts and other kinds of things. The sanctions implemented since January, if they continue, will almost certainly result in tens of thousands more of avoidable deaths. This is based on an estimated 80,000 people with HIV who have not had antiretroviral treatment since 2017, 16,000 people who need dialysis and can't get it, 16,000 people with cancer who can't get treatment, and 4 million with diabetes and hypertension, many of whom can't obtain insulin or cardiovascular medicine. And then since the sanctions that began in January 2019, oil production has fallen by 431,000 barrels per day, or 36.4%. This will greatly accelerate the humanitarian crisis. So there you have it. All right. That's what the United States did to Venezuela. And that hasn't ended. Biden has softened the sanctions a bit because of this crisis with Russia and its proxy war. So certainly it's softened. And to the credit of Venezuela, Venezuela has done everything it can. And we had Camila Escalante talk about this, everything it can to curb inflation, to right the economy, and even to produce some growth, which is happening in Venezuela now, which is incredible. And that is all to the credit of the Bolivarian Revolution and the leadership of Nicolas Maduro, the PSUV, and the movement there. That's all to the credit of them. But the United States is still trying to starve Venezuela and already has killed tens of thousands of people. So again, who is cruel here? The United States considers itself the master of the world. Tucker Carlson is not even hiding it. That's what he said. He said they're not like us at all. Like us, meaning we're the masters of the world. The United States, the U.S. imperialist system, is the so-called master of the world. That's what Tucker Carlson was saying. He said, we are. We're not like them, though. We're benevolent. We're good, right? This is what all my book was about. This is what my whole book was about on American Sanctions. We're good. We're the good ones here. We're the heroes. We're Captain America. We got the shield. We're actually defending humanity from democracy. I mean, from fascism and for democracy. That's what we are to Tucker Carlson. And that's what he peddles. Then he says, China. Oh, no, China. China's the one who is killing people, death trap diplomacy and all of this. China's the one who's impoverishing. Oh, China's aggressive in the South China Sea, right? China, 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 China. That's what we hear. We don't hear about the tens of thousands of Venezuelans who have been killed. No, we hear about Maduro as the dictator who has caused economic catastrophe and mass migration and all of this, but they won't even say deaths because they know that's a very sensitive thing. But then the U.S. will fund guarimbas and right-wing opposition and downright fascists to behead people in the streets, right? That's what they did in 2014, 17, right? The unrest that they created in Venezuela, absolutely gross, with millions of dollars being poured into these right-wing groups. So this is what Tucker Carlson is doing. We're coming up on an election, and this rhetoric is likely to get more and more toxic. But even just here, we see how cruel the United States is just in the sanctions on Venezuela alone. We even got into Nicaragua, the NICA Act, right? Nicaragua is now feeling that pain. A lot of countries in Latin America, right, are feeling the pain of what the U.S. has done. So I want to show you what China is doing in Latin America. And I'll go with both a source, Telesur, and I will also go with China's expert assessment in the Global Times about its investment in Latin America. All right. So while you're waiting for that, though, please do continue to like the stream. Hit that subscribe button, but like the stream first. Let's get the likes. And it looks like the likes are now surpassed viewers, which is great. So please do continue to share the stream. Like it if you haven't, of course. Please also subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and hit that notifications bell. And I am about $40, just $40 away, $41 away from my goal on Patreon for the year. which I hope will be the end of my, monetization of this work, because I do have to, upgrade some technology. I do also have to meet my needs. This is my income now. As you all know, I only work part-time now. So please do subscribe at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. So let's get to the Latin America piece, okay, of China. So what has China done? Okay. Let's talk about the Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America. This was written just last month. It's just an infographic, so we're going to get a bit of a sense of what the Belt and Road Initiative, China's flagship infrastructure project, what it's doing. So here you go. The Belt and Road Initiative in Latin America. There's 21 countries in Latin America that are signatories, including Argentina and Chile, that have signed cooperation agreements under the Belt and Road Initiative. Here you have Latin America as the second largest destination for Chinese foreign investment. By the end of 2021, China's direct investment stock in Latin America exceeded $450 billion, accounting for 19% of China's total. Latin America has hosted more than 2,700 Chinese-funded enterprises, and I guarantee you 0 of them have to do with arming Contras and Guarimbas and economic sanctions. This is the opposite of economic sanctions, right? Latin America is China's third largest overseas construction contracting market. As of July 2021, the cumulative contract value of Chinese enterprises in Latin America has exceeded $220 billion, and completed turnover has exceeded $140 billion. China is Latin America's second largest trading partner. In 2021, the total trade volume between China and Latin American countries hit a record high of $451.6 billion, an increase of 41% compared with 2020. And then I'm going to go to Telesur to get a little bit more detail on this, because that's just the overall investment numbers. And it's staggering. This is in a relatively short period of time, right? The United States has treated Latin America as its backyard, quote unquote, and has economically dominated the region. But it is quickly losing, right? It's quickly losing, hasn't lost yet, but is quickly losing its influence, because its economic relations are fundamentally different. It's not a Belt and Road, right? The United States isn't promising, well, we'll build these roads and bridges, and we'll help you build schools and stadiums and hospitals, and we'll help you build economic zones and factories, and we'll help you get 5G technology and high-speed internet, and we'll help you with rebuilding transportation and all of that. It's not promising that. The United States says, okay, well, we'll indebt you, we'll militarize you, and will destabilize you. That's what U.S. economic relations have done for Latin America. That's why countries in Latin America that are dominated by the United States are poor countries, some of the poorest in the world. So here you go. Here is China to deepen cooperation with Latin America and the Caribbean, which was written in March of 2022, so just a few months before. I got to say, I love Telesur, but this format, there's just like things popping out all the time. It's hard to read Telesur sometimes from a user perspective, but I know they got to advertise and all that. Anyway, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, since the outbreak of COVID-19, China has strengthened health exchanges with Latin American and Caribbean nations, supplying them with almost 400 million doses of vaccines and units of health products. China today expressed its willingness to work more with Latin America and the Caribbean to deepen friendship and cooperation, emphasizing the region is not anyone's backyard. So does that sound cruel to you? I don't know about you, but it doesn't sound like China is really interested in being the master of anyone, when you have Joe Biden saying Latin America is our front yard. And then you have China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, saying, no, it's not the backyard of anyone. He told Prensa Latina, which is a Cuban outlet, that the parties' common goal is to consolidate independence, development, and recovery. Wang deplored the harassment and abuse of political power in that area, indicated that their peoples need justice and win-win cooperation. According to the Chinese FM, since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, China has strengthened health exchanges with Latin American Caribbean nations and supplied them, as I said, with 400 million doses of health units, products, vaccines. He also highlighted the record figure of $400 billion in trade operations during 2021. And so here you have Carlos Martinez. You may know him. He's been on the stream. I co-edit Friends of Socialist China with him. And here's his tweet about debunking that China is somehow a colonial power. Likewise, the celebration of the third China CELAC ministerial summit, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, which he valued as a space for broad consensus and deepening mutual trust and cooperation for the next 3 years. When Cuba in September 1960 recognized the People's Republic of China as the only legitimate representative of its people in the world, it opened the way for an approach between China and Latin America based on meeting points and respect for the free choice of each political system and development strategy. From 2017 to 2021, Panama, DR, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Nicaragua were the last to make the sovereign determination to establish ties with China, while Argentina joined the Belt and Road Project, which seeks to build a broad network of infrastructure and trade operations by land and sea. So Cuba is also part of the Energy Belt and Road Initiative. So Latin America, right? And we've covered in No Cold War, Friends of Socialist China, different projects. We've covered how instrumental China's aid to Bolivia and other countries has been providing that infrastructure. And so that doesn't sound cruel to me. That sounds like China and Latin America are trying to work together to meet common goals, one of which is to defeat underdevelopment, poverty, and also to assert sovereignty. That's what it sounds like. So it doesn't sound like China wants to be the cruel master, all right? But Tucker Carlson does have one thing correct here. Latin America is not like us. I mean, China is not like us. Latin America also, in many respects. But China is not like us. China is not doing what the United States has done to Latin America. It's not colonizing. It's not going in as an imperialist power. It is not looting. It is not plundering. Actually, it's investing more and more. It's giving more and more. And it doesn't it deplores sanctions. China opposes sanctions. Syria, DPRK, Venezuela, across the board, Cuba. China opposes all those sanctions and is vocal about that in the United Nations. And so I'm just going to show you one more article. Again, this is from the Global Times. So I've used some Global Times. I want to show you Africa. Because as you may know, the United States has been far, and I'm just going kind of jumping around the world. We didn't do Russia or anything like that today. But we'll just go Global South, Latin America, Africa, and of course, we did the wars in Asia. So I want to show you Africa. So what is China doing on the African continent? This gets the most coverage. I've covered it here. So here, Xiaoxin, over at the Global Times, says China's Africa infrastructure investment is a stark contrast to Western lip service. Okay, I believe that. I mean, what happened on the African continent with the United States? Like, how is the United States treated the African continent? Is the United States a benevolent actor that is in contradistinction to China? Because China's bad, right? China's real bad. Well, what did the United States do in 2011 to Libya? Let's just look at that example. So 2011, the United States, with its NATO partners and the U.S. Africa Command, key institution here, the U.S. Africa Command, in its first operation since the Bush administration had created it and Obama pumped steroids into it, conducted and helped facilitate this military operation in Libya, which killed tens of thousands of people and overthrew the most progressive government on the continent at that time and the most prosperous country on the continent at that time, which was the Jamahiriya government in Libya. Muammar Gaddafi sodomized, assassinated brutally, you know the whole deal. Hillary Clinton cackled, we saw, he died. And Libya was turned into a hellhole, a disaster. It was turned into a chaotic mess, such a mess that actually it was hard to characterize it as some kind of neo-colonial relationship because there wasn't even any prospects for stability because this was part of the U.S.'s project, right, of using proxy wars as the primary means to destabilize countries. And those proxy wars have some real consequences, which is, well, you arm groups that don't necessarily have any interest in governing. And so, right, you had a lot of ungovernability plague Libya and still plaguing Libya to this day. So That's what the United States did in Libya. And then, of course, it cascaded across Northern Africa. You know about the terrorism situation that's proliferated across Northern Africa. And we also know, right, from east to west, north to south on the African continent, the United States has played a negative role economically. Not only does it not invest fairly, and it barely invests at all, but it also is instrumental in its leadership over the international financial institutions, which have plundered African wealth in the so called post colonial era and left African countries from east to west, north to south in a state of extreme poverty. That's what they've done. That's what Western financial institutions and corporations have done. They create monocultural, indebted economies that cannot sustain the needs of the people in those countries. And then the political instability of the expansion of the US Africa Command only helps facilitate that further by creating that political instability. Is China doing that? No, China's not doing that. So is China the cruel master to come, or is China something different? And here's the article, right? It says it's a stark contrast, they argue. And let's see how they prove it. This was written in February of 2022. China's commitments to infrastructure projects in sub-Saharan Africa impressively dwarf that of the West, according to new study findings, speaking convincingly to the actual achievements of China's proposed BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, that builds bridges between different parts of the world. By comparison, the West, that has kept itself entertained and with ill-grounded criticism toward the BRI, is making little progress in its African infrastructure funding, despite a slew of infrastructure-centric incentives that are being touted as BRI substitutes. Absurdly, the addiction to finding faults with China, Tucker Carlson, compounded by the continued iteration of lip service, has established the U.S.-led Western Task Force as the culprit of dismantling bridges for the global community in dire need of increased interconnectedness. From 2007 to 2020, China's development banks lent $23 billion for infrastructure projects in sub-Saharan Africa, more than double the funding provided by such development finance institutions in the US, Germany, Japan, and France combined, Reuters reported on Wednesday, citing a new study by the Center for Global Development, a Washington, D.C. based think tank. More strikingly, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, the main U.S. development funding agency, provided nearly $1.9 billion in financing for infrastructure in the region during the period, not even 1/10 of the amount of Chinese funding, the study found. The stunning comparison apparently speaks volumes for a truly constructive role China has played on the African continent in a pivotal component of the BRI. In an address to a reception celebrating the 58th Africa Day in Beijing in May 2021, Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that in the front of the COVID-19, China has remained Africa's top trading partner for 12 years in a row. The China-Africa cooperation under the BRI has continued to deepen, with 46 African nations and the African Union Commission having inked cooperation deals with China, according to Wang. The China-Africa tie-up is seen as underpinning the BRI framework. China has signed more than 200 documents on BRI cooperation with 147 countries and 32 international organizations. Jin Xiaodong, a spokesperson for the National Development and Reform Commission, disclosed in mid-January. China's financing of sub-Saharan African infrastructure conspicuously turns the BRI-enabled vision of inclusive growth across the globe into a reality, pumping the much-needed funding and access to technology for the African continent to connect with the rest of the world. The West, and the U.S. in particular, nonetheless is shown to be holding on to its hackneyed anti-China rhetoric with a variety of seemingly fancy plans, such as the US-led G7 initiative known as the Build Back Better World and the EU's Global Gateway, coming across as a slew of recycled ideas and rhetoric. And you saw at the G7 summit recently that now there's another infrastructure plan. It's the same thing. A friend in need is a friend indeed. It's evidently clear that the African people where the true friendship stands. For those who have gone to extremes to misinterpret the BRI as debt trap diplomacy, all such compelling comparisons ought to be a wake-up call for them to get back on the right track of global inclusivity. With a number of BRI signature projects in Africa and elsewhere globally financed by Chinese development banks, other BRI economies, and multilateral financial agencies, well in progress to address the global infrastructure divide, those deliberately sowing seeds of discord, it is believed, would automatically be silenced. So what sub-Saharan Africa, one of the poorest regions in the world, genuinely wants is is a helping hand to enable it to join a global trend of interconnectedness rather than lip services or carrot and stick options that put sub-Saharan African countries at risk of decoupling. It doesn't matter, however spectacular the Build Back Better world and the global gateway seem. What matters is whether such incentives genuinely funnel money into regions such as the sub-Saharan Africa, where infrastructure projects would be critical to local economic growth. So it's high time for them to do that, this is saying. And there you see China dwarfs, right, by many times. And that Global Times article was not citing itself. It was not saying, oh, well, Chinese institutions saying. It said a Reuters report of a study by a Washington-funded think tank said this. A Washington-funded think tank said that the United States is way behind, is not even trying really to invest in infrastructure. That's what those numbers indicate. So who's the cruel master again? The United States, which is one, acting cheap and does not help, and two, militarizes the continent and creates devastating instability? Or is it China, which is actually trying to bridge what it calls the infrastructure divide, which is Africa, Asia, Latin America, are all well behind the West, right? All well behind. They were not allowed to develop their economies, to advance the productive forces, to address poverty, to address malnourishment, to address their basic needs. China's trying to step in and say, we can do that because and I said this, right? I've said this on programs, other interviews. I was talking about this recently with KJ No, and I said, if you caught that stream yesterday, I said that what China does abroad reflects what it does at home. China, right, has had to navigate underdevelopment, extreme poverty, and also a society which it calls a civilization, not a nation, because it's 56 different ethnic groups, regions, which are vastly different from each other, from north, south, east, and west. I mean, we're talking about a country with so much ecological diversity, human diversity, and so many localized problems that China has has a centralized economy capable of distributing resources while also creating local infrastructure, people-to-people infrastructure through the Communist Party and other mass organizations, which can then target certain problems, not just address problems with sort of a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not what China does. And China doesn't do that abroad either. China doesn't say, well, every country needs the same thing, so this is what we want to do, and that's all we're going to offer. No, China works and cooperates and says, well, what do you need? This is what we need. Let's do business together. Let's work together to meet those goals. And they've identified, just like many countries have identified, there's a big infrastructure divide. Countries in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America, they need rail, they need roads, they need 5G technology, they need internet access, they need electricity, they need clean energy, they need so much, right? They need so much because of what's been taken from them by the actual cruel master, the actual cruel imperialist master of the world. That's the United States. And that's what Tucker Carlson's not telling you. He's telling you it's China. It's China. It's China. But it's just not true. It's just not true. And not only is that not true, but just that framing. China is not like us at all. China is not like us at all. China is going to be a cruel master when it takes over the world. That's what Tucker Carlson said. That one reinforces yellow peril racism and new Cold War talking points, and two completely erases and whitewashes the actual history of U.S. imperialism and what it is doing right now as the quote-unquote cruel master of the world. And then it also masks China's role in the world right now, in China's own history, in China's own circumstances, and how China is developing relationships, how China is conducting itself in terms of foreign policy, economic policy, so on and so forth. That's a massive amount of propagandizing. That's a lot to cover. And he did so in just a very short time. He did it in very few words. And that is the power of imperialist propaganda. That is its power, is in the absence of understanding in the absence of consciousness, and also in the absence of an organized alternative, those words do so much. They do so much to paralyze the political situation. They do so much harm to all of us, to our movements, to the people, to the workers, to the oppressed. Does so much harm to have that message be what is watched more so than any other program in the world, to have that message be seen by more people in the United States than perhaps any other message. Think about that. If he is getting the highest ratings, then more people are watching him than anything else. And that's the message you get. And this isn't to say, you know me here, this isn't to say the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN are better. No, their messages are just as dangerous. But it's important to also say that this is dangerous too. And this is right there. This is right there. Right there. And in many ways, this surpasses it because it's a level of jingoism that invigorates and actually moves people. I think this is what people need to understand, is that the Democrats and the liberal corporate media, sure, they move people. They move their people, right? Their message moves their people. It moves liberals into Russiagate. It has a huge impact. That is definitely true. But then there's a lot of disillusionment, a lot of distrust, and a lot of mistrust of those messages too. But it's the capacity of the right to, and of people like Tucker Carlson, to seize on this moment, to create a message that's more effective about a question like China, which arguably could make him even more dangerous in the sense that he's posing as an alternative, just like we talked about yesterday with Elon Musk, posing as a rebel, as an alternative, right? And this is where it's dangerous when he expands his platform. Not to say we shouldn't go on, but we have to keep in mind that there are many sides to this issue. We should go on if we're invited. We should spread the word. But we should also know that his ability to be more effective thus makes his message more dangerous as well, right? Because what is, just like under Obama, we say he's a more effective evil. What's more dangerous, a more effective evil or an imperialist media, corporate media that's not trusted? They both are dangerous. We're not comparing for the sake of which one is better. All I'm saying is that if you are more effective and able to spread these messages and get people to believe it and then get people to act on it, which is happening, violence against Asian Americans, Chinese people, people of any kind of Asian descent, especially East Asian, the new Cold War, public opinion dropping, it's working. I mean, it worked with Russiagate and it worked with that too. But it could be argued that there is an even more sort of unifying message, this American exceptionalist message around China, because, and I'm just going to close the segments and then I'm going to stay on with all of you probably for another 15, 20, maybe even a half hour. And then I could take questions maybe and just kind of kick it. The message about China, unlike Russia, and we have to keep this in mind, no one legitimately thinks that Russia is a threat. And what I mean by that, threat to the United States, is that even the most pro-imperialist hawks, Russia hawks, don't actually believe that Russia is a threat to them. Why? Well, because Russia's economy is small. Russia's economy is still relatively underdeveloped because of, well, what the West did to it post-Soviet Union. And Russia is not in a position to be a world hegemon. While China is not in a position to be a world hegemon, but that's not because of China's material weakness. No, that's all political. China doesn't want to be a world hegemon. China has an advanced military, so does Russia. But China also has an ascending economy that Russia does not have. China also has a socialist government, which Russia does not have. China also, I think both are non-white countries. That's my opinion in how they're treated. But there are a lot of people who look at China and Russia and they say Russia's the white country, China is not. I don't make the rules. That's just racism. That's just how it works. And I know that's how it works. So you have a non-white country, 20% of the world's population, under a socialist government, with an economy that is bigger in purchasing power parity terms than the United States and the rest of the world, and the rest of the West. And in GDP terms will be bigger very soon. Promoting a message of peace, win-win cooperation, infrastructure development, poverty alleviation, fighting climate change. I mean, on and on and on. So that's a threat. That is the threat that China poses to imperialism. It's not that it's going to be a cruel master, but it surely is not like us, meaning the United States' imperialist system. It's not like it. So we should take Tucker Carlson only by his word that China is not like the United States. That is for damn sure. But it's different in the exact opposite way as Tucker Carlson is putting it. Tucker Carlson believes the United States is a democracy, that the United States is benevolent, that the United States helps countries around the world. He's one of those white nationalist jingoists, dare I say white nationalists, but he is one of these jingoists who believes that what the United States does abroad, right, with oil and all this stuff, that's all helping other countries and not us. That's the rhetoric that kind of poses as peace rhetoric, right? That the United States is a nanny state. It helps everyone else and not us. How many times did you hear that during the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan? I heard it mostly from white people, but I heard it from many different people. That was going around in the right-wing media. It still goes around. It still goes around. The United States was helping Afghanistan, helping Iraq. I just showed you that they killed 500,000 people. Helping? Destroying infrastructure? Poisoning people? Helping? But that is the mentality that Tucker Carlson has been pushing down people's throats for years now. That's what Fox News has been doing. That's what the Western corporate media as a whole has been doing. Sky News, which was playing him there. They're some of the biggest culprits of this just disgusting nationalistic imperialist rhetoric. Helping. The United States helps too much. It's got to focus on its own people. That's not even true. There's nothing true about that. We should, on the left, if we're leftists, we should point out that the United States is sending $40 billion worth in weaponry, or $53 billion, or whatever it was, in a very short period of time to Ukraine, military aid. That money, sure, we need to say that money plus the $800 billion more dollars the United States is openly telling us that they're investing in military means. Sure, that money should be used for us, for people's needs. Sure. But it is wholly inaccurate to say that the United States, by putting that money into Ukraine, putting that weaponry into Ukraine, putting all that money into its military, is helping around the world, helping other countries, as if the military is some sort of aid organization, philanthropic organization. We talk about this in our book, but this is how it's framed, right? This is how it's framed. The United States is an aid. It's like this big aid organization just throwing money abroad. We need to spend it here. That's how Sagar and Jetty gets off. This is how these people pose as somehow for peace, but they're not. They're not. Because they can go around and turn around and say China's the biggest threat and we need to go do everything we can to bomb them to smithereens or whatever the fuck, right? Sanction them. The United States, they've already put through sanctions. I'm trying to find a good guest for the Xinjiang situation because I want to have a good conversation with someone about that. I'm also going to try to have someone about Hong Kong. I'm going to try to get a legislator from Hong Kong on this program because you guys requested this a long time ago. So I want to cover Hong Kong, Xinjiang. I also want to cover Tibet. So I want to cover these issues, and I want to do it with people who are very knowledgeable and, that can give that perspective. But that's what I'm saying. There's no humanitarian interventionism. There's no U.S. nanny state. There's none of that. That's not true. The only thing the United States is helping around the world, and this is going to be my new Black Agenda Report article, the only thing the United States is doing around the world is creating more chaos. It's the biggest purveyor of chaos. It's the biggest supporter of reactionary fundamentalism, extreme right-wing politics, and fascism. That's what the United States is doing around the world. So China is not going to be the cruel master that takes over the world. The United States is already a cruel, what it thinks of itself as a master, an imperialist master of the world. And it's already caused so much damage. And the longer that it remains the hegemon, the more damage that will come. Just look at what's happening in Ukraine. Just look at what's happening all over the world. The United States is the problem. And Tucker Carlson, his whole business model is predicated upon telling you that China is the problem and only the Democrats are the problem, right? His whole business model is based on that, based on who watches his show and who he's trying to win over. That's just the facts. It's been the facts for many years. That's Tucker Carlson. That doesn't make him better or worse than anyone else. But when it comes to this China question, there's something very dangerous going on. Just like with the Democrats and liberals with Russia, something very dangerous going on. And we can't allow ourselves to get bamboozled and say, well, one is better than the other. That's a very, 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 very simplistic and dangerous trajectory to go down. So I'm here to say, and I'm here to conclude that what Tucker Carlson said in those few seconds is just as dangerous as Russiagate or any other imperialist talking point that the Western liberal corporate media, from BBC to MSNBC, from what they say about anything, China, Russia included, right? That it's just as dangerous. And that's just a few seconds. I don't watch Tucker Carlson enough, but I know that he does that more than a few seconds long, a lot. A lot. So with that said, everyone, I'm going to close up the segment, the content part here. And please do like the stream, of course. I'm going to stay on for another several minutes, probably for another 15 minutes or so, 15, 20. So please do hit the like button if you have not yet. Please do subscribe to the channel. Hit the notifications bell. If you're new here, subscribe, hit the notifications bell. And then, of course, I am just $41 or so away from my goal on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHighFall. That's patreon.com/DannyHighFall. That's the best way to support my work. I'm going to go and thank all these super chats, though, as well. But the best way to support the work is to do that. I have a goal of $41 more per month. So if I can get closer to that, I want to meet that before the end of July here. So please do, if you're able, support my work. Patreon.com/DannyHighFong. So with that said, everyone, I'm going to thank some of these super chats, and we can have a conversation. If you want to put questions in the chat on the bottom, if you've already asked questions, please just put it back in the chat at the bottom. Very hard to go back in a chat like this unless you've super chatted. So I want to try to thank these super chats. I'm only seeing one. AK Lee, thank you for your generous super chat. Thank you so much. We also had here Tabernac. Thank you so much for that super chat. So I'm just going to keep seeing. I think there might have been one more or a few more. Felix, thanks so much for your loyal support. I really appreciate it. Always seeing you around. I only wish Chinese would be cruel masters and two white supremacists like Tucker, but their 7,000-year history and track record in the last 7 years prove otherwise. Yes. Very good point. Very good point. I'm gonna see if there's any more. I see someone came in with a super chat question. I see JB Font had a question as well. Let me see, but super chats. I don't think there were any more. Oh, here we go. Tabernacle again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your generous support. Wow, chat is active today, guys. Thanks so much. All right, that looks like that's for the super chat. Now there's one. Cameron, thank you so much. No question there from Cameron, but thank you so much for the super chat. Okay, so got some funny questions here. Anthony said, "Do I like rock and roll?" Yes, because that's a really broad topic. I had a phase, right? I had a phase before I fully embraced hip hop. I had a phase where I liked a lot of like the alternative rock, like the Foo Fighters and that. I can listen to the Foo Fighters still, like Foo Fighters, Linkin Park, that kind of thing. I had a phase when I was like a pre-adolescent, where I really liked their music, 11, 12, 13. And I appreciate some parts of, other parts of rock and roll, the classic history and stuff. A lot of it is black music, of course. So I appreciate it. I would say yes, I like it. I'm a much bigger hip hop fan though. So we have a question here by Rhonda Fari. What do you think of climate change and possible climate collapse? Well, huge question. What do I think of climate change? I think it's real. I don't think we should be saying it's not real. I do think that people have good points, although they take it too far sometimes, but it's definitely true that the imperialists have used climate change as another opportunity to undermine the global south and developing countries and countries looking to seek their own path. So that's true. However, climate change is a real problem, and it's one that falls at the feet of the United States. In terms of cumulative emissions, I think it's Canada, Australia, and the United States, which by far owe the most to the planet and the environment. And so they are by far the most responsible for the climate catastrophe that we're in. And I think, right, one point that I think can be made about this here, to stay on the theme of today's stream, is that if we look at how China has approached climate change, right? Because China has had to go through a massive and rapid industrialization program. It's had to rapidly industrialize in order to meet the needs of its population, very large population. China has simultaneously committed to improving its environment and has shown results with that. It has actually done so. It's reduced pollution. It's reduced pollution more than any country and more than most of the so-called advanced capitalist countries combined over the last 2 decades or so. Especially over the last decade, a lot has been done, accelerated that pace. So if you look at China's investment in renewable energy, if you look at what they've done to green their economy, they have real benchmarks that aren't just talking points like the United States to become carbon neutral, that their benchmark is one that they're actively pursuing. While the United States continues to drill, baby, for oil, continues to frack all that gas, and continues to stop any kind of effort to green the economy. Doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to do that because it is beholden to, the United States government is beholden, and the West is beholden to the polluters and the banks that like the polluters. So I think that's what we really have to address, is we have to address those forces: finance capital, the big monopolies, right? What Michael Hudson calls these natural monopolies. There's private monopolies over the natural monopolies, what we could call the commanding heights of the world economy. The vast majority of them are owned by private corporations. China does it differently. And so despite the massive industrialization, which did lead to pollution, did lead to China becoming the biggest at this moment, right, emitter of carbon. Uh, uh, the history says differently, and it's that history, just like the history of slavery, just like the history of war and imperialism and colonialism. It's that history which needs to be reckoned with, and until that history is reckoned with, there will be no addressing the climate crisis, and we've gotta reckon with it quick, because it's absolutely ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So I'm gonna look for some other questions. While I do that, if there's somebody asked me if I listen to CYNE. I have not, but you can send me stuff. Surely you can send me stuff. One of my platforms. Even put it in the comments of this video. Go right ahead. It actually helps boost the algorithm when you put a comment in the video afterward. So I don't see any other questions. I do want to do something. I forgot to do this last stream. Actually, Julie Anderson said, Danny, would you go on progressive shows like Katie Halper? I've been on Katie Halper's a couple of times. I really like Katie Halper. I mean, I can't help it. She's cool. She's nice. She's open. She's funny. Katie Halper is a cool person. Katie Halper gets a lot of crap because I know that she has a range of guests on. But I actually do appreciate one thing that I'll always say about what Katie Halper does that I appreciate is that she is willing to engage with a wide range of the left, give them space, and allow us to make judgments based on what they're saying. That's kind of the spirit of media, in my opinion. What independent media should be doing is you should be giving a broad range of perspectives. It shouldn't all be debate. We gotta debate. We gotta have a hot debate about XYZ. That can be one form of giving people the ability to make their own decisions on things. But I think that she does a good job of giving space to a wide range of the left and then allowing people to make decisions while also staying true to principles, which is a very hard thing to do. It's very difficult to do that. It's super difficult. This media environment doesn't let us really do that. So I appreciate Katie Halper's support over the last what, year and a half, 2 years. And yeah, so I would go on again if asked. But surely I think we'll be collaborating. I do owe her also, hopefully an appearance either here or in Colin. So I don't see any other questions. I do want to say though that let me go all the way back to the bottom. I do want to say that Ron Placone, and I'm going to pull it up because I think you should support this campaign. Because one of our biggest problems right now, I'm going to pull it up real quick because I want to definitely plug it, and hopefully I'll show him that I plugged it because he asked me, and I've been swamped, and so he's a part of this antitrust summer. So I'm sharing it here with you all. I'm going to put the link in the chat. And so I just want you all to engage with this because there's a bill that's out there, S2992 and S2710. So please do support this campaign. I hope I'm not too late. But one of the biggest issues we have right now is that, it says right here, big tech giants are violating our rights and undermining our democracy. And because they abuse their monopoly power to stifle competition, many of us don't have other choices. U.S. Congress has finally introduced legislation to put people back in control of tech. Tell your elected officials to pass antitrust reform legislation and stop big tech for dominating our lives. You should support this. Just watch the video. So there's a video here. Let's see what the video go. Oh, here it is. So I don't know how long this is, but watch that video. I think it's a good segment by John Oliver. I know his contradictions. I know he says bad things on other things, but that's a good segment, I think. And you can support this campaign. So I just wanted to do that for Ron, just to boost that because he asked me, and I try to help out others as much as I can with what little resources I have. So I just wanted to show you all that. And again, the link is now in the chat. So go find that. But with that said, definitely, this is a big problem that we have. We know we have efforts like Panquake. We know we have efforts, other independent media efforts and outlets to try to bridge some of the censorship and algorithm issues. But really, these monopolies do have a grip, and it's because there is no accountability at all. None. They aren't accountable. They have zero transparency. You got people on here. I think Jackson Hinkle posted a video today saying that he was demonetized permanently. Like demonetized permanently. And I know this because I've had communications with YouTube too. You just like with communications with Twitter or anything else, you don't know who it is. It's nobody. It's like it is incredibly just ridiculous what these big tech corporations can get away with, how much they control what we do, how we do it. Again, I say over and over and over again that this is so chilling, right? You remember what happened in March with the big closures of RT America and all of that. It's so chilling that you have people on the left saying, yeah, I am careful about what I say on social media. I am careful about how I say it. And I said before, was it yesterday or the day before or the stream before, that I've been reported again for talking about how Rachel Maddow is grifting over Russiagate. So I've been reported and I've already been locked out of my account twice. And it's likely that the next time I'm successfully reported, I'm gone. And that's the power. It doesn't even matter that the message is not violent. It's not harassment. It's just political commentary and analysis. It doesn't matter because Twitter is saying what is acceptable and what isn't. YouTube is saying what is acceptable and what isn't. And most importantly, that determination, which will be a determination after the revolution, because certainly, right, a lot of people who are principled say, well, yeah, of course you shouldn't be putting a clamp down on violence and racism and sexism and all that stuff. You should when it's violent and it's disruptive and when it causes harm. Yeah, when there's a crime involved, especially, you should be. But we don't have the power. That's the problem. Big tech monopolies are representing the power of capital, right? That's what they're doing. And they're dictating by complete and utter control of the information sphere what is legitimate information and what isn't. And so that's why it's important to support campaigns like that, because we need to popularize that issue and make it more, right? I think we need to make it more visible, because a lot of people, this happened during the NSA surveillance and all of that. A lot of people just accept. They don't expect anything, so they just accept. They just say, okay, all right, I don't got time for that. I don't, it just is what it is, right? How many times have you heard that from people when it comes to these issues? So we need a sense of urgency around it. So I appreciate Ron for putting that to my attention. But with that said, I don't see any other questions. Let's see. It says not that this should be a contest, but how many people? I don't know what this is. I don't know. This is a troll. Look at this. It's the 100 million people number again. That completely unreputable number, which has never been verified, and usually comes from the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which counts all sorts of things, including all of the deaths of World War II. They blame on communism, and that's the 100 million number, right? And I think they throw in some kind of the hunger in China, right? Numbers that are also very dubious, given that the population grew and that life expectancy improved over the time of the Great Leap Forward. So that viewer said, "Oh, more people died under communism." Completely and utterly false. First of all, even if the 100 million number was true, which it isn't, because again, as I said, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation counts like all of the deaths of World War II as communist deaths, even though it was mostly fought out between capitalists and fascists and whatnot. They count all the deaths of the fascists as well as communist deaths, right? even if it were true, capitalism has a history of, 500 years, right? From its embryonic stages, right? Where it wasn't fully capitalist, right? There was still feudal elements, but the colonial period, the huge hundreds of years long colonial period, you have probably 50 to 100 million Africans who died during the chattel slave trade. You have a similar number of indigenous people wiped away over that period. And then you have all the wars that these imperialists fought when their capitalist governments, when their capitalist systems developed further. You have all the wars that they fought, colonial wars, wars amongst each other. You're looking at we're talking about hundreds of millions of people. The United States alone is estimated just from 1945 to 1990 have killed 20 to 30 million people. United States alone, in a very short period of time, only counting U.S. interventions. We're not counting all the other things that the United States has done to kill people, including in the United States, including around the world through sanctions and the externalities and the amount and all of that. So I always find it hilarious that, it's a contest. It's never a contest because it's unmatched. It's unrivaled. And that's not even to say that the socialist governments, called communist governments here, really did raise the standard of living, improved life incredibly. People in the Soviet Union, right, went from some of the poorest in the world to having the second most advanced economy in the world by the 1960s and 70s, after being destroyed by fascists. Fascists destroyed the Soviet Union's infrastructure, killed 27 million people. And then the Soviet Union, 10, 15, 20 years later, was the second most advanced economy. Now, it stagnated, and there are many reasons for that. But nonetheless, life in the Soviet Union was far better than before the Soviet Union. And then, of course, it was better than after the Soviet Union. So life expectancy was higher. People had their basic rights. There's a reason why people are nostalgic for the Soviet Union. Because healthcare, education, housing, all of that was provided for. People didn't have to go with that want. There are issues, yes, issues that led to its downfall. There was imperialist external pressures, and there were also internal pressures. And then China, that's not even a question. China was one of the poorest countries in the world before 1949. Was one of the poorest countries in the world all the way up into the 60s and 70s, all the way up into the 80s. Yet it's risen all these people, it's lifted all these people out of poverty, more than 1 billion people, 850 million people. And then, of course, you have to factor in all of the people that were lifted out of poverty before that, over the 40-year period. Then you're talking about all the infrastructure, all the development, the fact that life expectancy has gone from something like 40 now to nearly 80, over 80 in much of the big cities, right? Life is better in China. Population has grown. It's grown for the general population. It's grown for the Uyghur ethnic minority. Life has gotten way better. That's just true. That's just the facts. That's just the facts, right? Poverty is a lot less than it was in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region now than it was in 1990. You had millions of people lifted out of poverty since that time. No extreme poverty in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So life is better under socialism, guys. That's the lesson. Hundreds of millions of people do not die. Life gets better. That's the anti-communist talking points. Look at Cuba. Cuba was a colony. It was a neo-colony, a vassal state, super exploited. The U.S. used it as a gambling ring, instituted racist, segregationist laws targeting Afro-Cubans. Illiteracy was rampant. After the revolution, life expectancy has exploded, rivals that of most of Florida, most of the United States, in this small island, which is still very poor because of U.S. sanctions. I can go on and on and on. Healthcare in Cuba is way better than it is in the United States. It's free and it's quality. Cuba produces things that the United States doesn't even have, mostly because of sanctions, but because they won't even produce them. Ointments for diabetic ulcers, which the United States doesn't have. Lung cancer vaccines, which the United States doesn't have. I mean, now China and Cuba have this pan-coronavirus vaccine, which is going to treat all the coronaviruses, including COVID-19. It's going to provide immunity for them. The United States won't get its hands on it because of sanctions, probably. I mean, that's the twisted reality of this current moment. But this is all to say, this is just a cursory argument, a cursory opposition, right, to this narrative of, oh, it's not a contest, but actually communists have killed more. Absolutely ludicrous. Malarkey, as our boy Joe Biden would say. Just not true. So we're heading to the 2-hour mark, guys. And unless you guys have another question or something that you want to get off your chest in the chat, I don't see any actual questions since that since that not so serious viewer asked that. But yeah, this was great. Thank you for supporting the show. Please, Creative Experiment says, communists have killed more Nazis and fascists, though, for sure. Oh, yes. That is surely something that will be done when necessary, and it was done. So are we closer to converting a corporation into a workers' co-op yet, says Red? No. You gotta usurp that. I mean, before you get any worker cooperatives, you gotta take it out. You gotta take it over. You need that power. You need to wrestle away the means of productions before you can do anything like that. Any worker co-ops. That's the thing, man. I'm not against worker co-ops. I don't think they're the only solution. I definitely want to see state-owned industries. State-owned industries, not from the U.S. government. I don't want to see U.S. government-owned industries. I want to see socialist state-owned industries with the commanding heights, because there's some things you're not going to worker co-op. You're not going to worker co-op oil or even big renewable. Like when we have renewable energy, you can't worker co-op that whole thing. That's a huge worker co-op. That's going to be really difficult. Some things you need strict planning, strict centralization, right? Some things you need some less centralization. That's what China's done. Less centralization, maybe more market orientation. Worker co-ops can both be worker or market oriented and worker oriented, right? It can. We got to experiment. So I'm all for worker co-ops, but it can't be the only thing. I did a whole study. So in college, before I was like a true blue, true red communist, I did a research paper with a business professor on worker cooperatives, and we went around. We interviewed one in New York City. We interviewed one in Western Massachusetts. We had phone calls with others that were further away that we just couldn't get to in time for the paper. And they all say that one of the hardest things is worker cooperatives living within the belly of capitalism. They don't say it like that, but they say, well, the private market, the fact that the profit incentives of the capitalist market make it hard to compete and therefore place pressures to, one, do what capitalist enterprises do, and then two, perhaps collapse if you don't do it. If you don't expand, you collapse and or you just become a capitalist enterprise. So it's one of the hardest things as worker cooperatives to exist, right? Because in worker cooperatives, all the workers have a share of the company. That's a deeper model, right? Worker co-op is a deeper model, is all workers have a share in the company and all of them sit on the board, meaning they just all work together to plan out, to administrate the business. But this is the hard thing, is that there can be competition that arises among the workers, differences in how it should be run, and then, right, this desire to grow the business, because you don't want the workers to be poor in the business, to then compete with other industries that or other corporations in the same industry that aren't doing it and are growing way faster because they don't have to do that. They can just exploit, and just move, right? They then have pressure to do similar things. So a lot of worker co-ops, there's a big one in New York City, a big home care agency. Oh, I forget its name now. But it pays a little better than the prevailing home care agencies in the neighborhood. But this was before the $15 hour minimum wage in New York City. But I think the prevailing wage was like $10 or less for home. Yes, I said it. $10 or less for home care workers in New York City. Criminal, right? Just absolutely makes me, my skin crawls when I hear that number. But they were paying something like 12 or 13, right? So sure, better, but they couldn't do any further because of how things work, how capitalism works. So worker cooperatives really can only be a strategy for a larger socialist revolution. It can't be the whole thing. It can't be the whole thing. But you know, um yeah, I just wanted to say that it can't be the whole thing. So thanks so much everyone for coming. I mean, I'm getting to the 2 hour mark. I definitely want to do some things, I think I want to do more like get to know you type things. Um, you know, I think that there's a lot about our backgrounds that we should know. I know JB Fauntleroy, Mr. JB Fauntleroy was here. Um, and I need to follow up with him. But I want, I think it's important that we know our backgrounds. Uh, Kareem from Revolutionary Blackout Network had the idea about that. I may do that more at the end of each segment, when there's no questions and I've done the content. I may do that more. And I just want to say this too. I don't have another producer. So some people have said, "Oh, well, cut out certain things of these streams before you post them." I'm not going to be always able to do that. So I just want to say that now to those who have requested that. I don't have all of the time to do that. Even I know YouTube has an easy tool, but that's another. We all got lives here. And I like to put my time into you all. All right. So with that said, this was a great stream. Thanks so much for supporting this work. Before you leave, patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. Well, you can leave and do this, but you can support my work there. I'm about $40 per month away from my annual goal. An annual goal, to be transparent, $3K per month. Not a huge goal. But yes. Oh, well, Jenny says she has a good editor. If you want to reach out to me, that would be amazing, Jenny. So just reach out to me. Because I definitely could use that help. But with that said, patreon.com/DannyHaiFong help support the show. And alternatively, or just in conjunction, like this stream before you go if you have not already. And yeah, subscribe, keep hitting the notifications bell so you know when I am on. All right. Thanks so much for everything, guys. I'm on my 2 hour mark. I'm starting to lose focus. So peace out, everyone. Bye bye. See you again soon.